The wind came from the north, a solid wall of ice and needles that Silas McCrae felt more in his bones than on his skin. It was the third day of the blizzard, a white fury that had buried the Wyoming territory in a shroud so deep the world had shrunk to the walls of his cabin and the short, dangerous path to the barn. He was checking the fence line, a fool's errand in a whiteout. But the thought of his livestock wandering off into the drift was a worry sharp enough to drive him from the hearth. He kept his head down, the brim of his hat pulled low, his neck wrapped in wool that was already stiff with ice. The air was too cold to breathe deep. He was counting posts, his gloved hand trailing the top wire. When he saw it, it was not a steer. It was just a shape, a dark knot against the gray-white of the tree line, barely visible through the driving snow. It was slumped against a fence post, a place no animal would choose to die. Silas stopped. The wind tore at his coat, trying to push him back toward the warmth he had left. He squinted, wiping ice from his eyelashes. It was a person. He moved closer, his boots sinking deep, his bad leg aching with the cold. He had seen death in many forms. He had seen it in the war, sudden and loud. He had seen it in the fire, hot and screaming. This was different. This was cold, quiet, and deliberate. She was tied to the post. Ropes bound her wrists to the wood, pulling her arms wide. Another rope was looped around her waist, securing her. Her head hung forward, black hair matted with snow and ice. She wore the remnants of a dress, something thin and colorful that was now torn to rags, offering no protection. A gag, stiff with frozen spit, was tied tight across her mouth. Silas felt nothing, not pity, not anger, just a deep, hollow weariness. This land was brutal. It took everything. He pulled his knife. The blade was sharp. He sawed through the ropes, stiff as iron wire. Her body, freed, slumped forward. He caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. He pulled the gag away, the frozen cloth tearing at the skin on her lips, leaving them raw. He lifted her. It was not a gentle act. It was a necessary one. He slung her over his shoulder, a sack of bones and ice, and turned his back to the wind. The walk back to the cabin was a fight. The world was gone. Only the white and the howl of the wind remained. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, dropping his burden on the worn bearskin rug by the hearth. He did not expect her to live. He had not rescued her. He had merely brought her inside to die. He stoked the fire, adding logs until the flames roared, casting dancing shadows on the sparse, half-repaired walls of the ranch house. He lit the lantern. In the yellow light, she looked worse. Her skin was the color of blue-tinged wax. Her lips were split and dark. Her fingers, where they poked from the torn sleeves, were blackening at the tips. He saw the rope burns on her wrists. They were not just burns. They were raw, weeping circles of flesh where she had fought the bindings until her skin gave way. He fetched the whiskey and a tin basin of water, which he set near the fire to warm. He cut away the remnants of the dress with his knife, his movements clumsy, impersonal. He was efficient, like a man skinning a deer. Under the rags, her body was a map of fading bruises, yellow and violet against the pale skin. She did not stir. Her breathing was a shallow, irregular flutter, a bird trapped in a failing chest. Silas took a rag, dipped it in the warm water, and began to clean the filth and ice from her face. His hands were large, calloused, scarred from ranch work and war. They were not built for gentle things. He scrubbed too hard, but she did not flinch. He cleaned her wrists, wincing as the rag came away bloody. He wrapped them in clean strips of linen. He forced a few drops of whiskey between her split lips, hoping the burn of it might spark something. She did not respond. He covered her with his thickest wool blanket, tucked the bearskin around her, and went back to his chair. He sat through the night, cleaning his rifle, listening to the storm rage outside and the faint, failing rattle of her breath inside. He expected it to stop at any moment, but when the gray morning light filtered through the snow-caked window, she was still breathing. He had not spoken a word. She had not made a sound. The next day passed in the same silence. He tended the fire. He melted snow for water. He went to the barn, fighting the drifts, to feed his horse and the 2 milk cows. When he returned, she was unchanged. He made a thin broth from dried jerky and forced some between her lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin. On the 3rd day, her eyes opened. They were vacant, staring at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling. They did not move. They did not blink. Silas sat in his chair, watching her. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. The silence of the cabin was heavy, broken only by the wind and the crackle of the fire. Hours passed. He watched her stare at the ceiling, and he wondered if her mind was as frozen as her body had been. Then she blinked. Her eyes moved, slow and painful, turning toward the fire. The flames danced, and she watched them, her expression unreadable. He saw her memories then. Though he did not know it, she was not seeing the fire in his hearth. She was seeing the bright gas lamps of a saloon stage. She could smell cheap perfume, stale beer, and the thick, sweet smoke of cigars. She heard the tinny pound of a piano and a ripple of laughter, coarse and loud. She felt a man's heavy hand on her shoulder, the thumb rubbing circles through the thin silk of her dress. A voice, thick with whiskey. "Sing it again, Clara Belle. Sing the one that makes the boys blush." Then the memory soured. The laughter turned cruel. The smell of perfume was replaced by the sharp, acidic scent of kerosene. A hand, not on her shoulder, but across her face. The sound of glass breaking, the heavy, final sound of a door locking, and the cold darkness of a cellar. She flinched on the bearskin rug. A small, violent tremor. Her eyes snapped away from the fire, back to the safety of the ceiling. Silas watched, saying nothing. For 2 more days, she refused food. He would leave the tin cup of broth on the floor beside her. When he returned, it was cold, untouched. He dumped it, refilled it, and left it again. He was a patient man, hardened by isolation. He could wait. On the 5th day, the cup was empty. He refilled it and set it down. He turned to mend a harness strap, the leather stiff and cold in his hands. He heard the faint scrape of the tin cup on the wooden floor. He did not turn around. He gave her the dignity of her hunger. Later that evening, the storm was at its peak, a howling banshee that shook the very foundations of the cabin. He was rubbing oil into the leather, the smell sharp in the warm room. "What do they call you?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. He did not look at her. He spoke to the harness in his lap. The silence stretched. He thought perhaps she had not heard him, or could not speak. He heard her take a breath, a dry, cracked sound. "Clara." The word was a whisper, a thread of sound so thin the wind almost swallowed it. It was the first word spoken between them. She did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the floor. He nodded, pulling the leather tight. "Silas." The storm trapped them. For another week, the snow fell, burying them completely. The world outside the windows was a churning wall of white. There was no leaving. The cabin became their entire world, a small island of warmth in a frozen sea. Clara slowly regained a shadow of strength. She moved from the hearth to the rickety cot he had set up for her in the warmest corner of the room. She still did not meet his eyes. She wrapped the wool blanket around her like armor, watching the fire, or the walls, or her own hands, still wrapped in his linen bandages. The isolation pressed in on Silas. He was a man used to solitude, a man who preferred it. But this silence was different. It was shared. It had weight. One night, the wind was so loud it sounded like screaming. Silas sat at the small table, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He found himself speaking, not to her, but to the room, to the storm itself. "This leg," he said, rubbing his left thigh. "Got it at Antietam. Mini ball. Doctor said they should take it." He grunted. "I kept the leg. It aches when the cold comes. Aches something fierce." Clara did not move, but he knew she was listening. Her stillness had changed. It was no longer vacant. It was watchful. "I don't mind the ache," he continued, his voice low. "It's a reminder. He fell silent again. 2 nights later, the wind was still howling. The sound seemed to claw at the chimney, reminding him of another sound, another night. He was staring into the fire, the flames hypnotic. "The fire," he said, his voice barely audible. "It was fast. I was in the barn, tending a sick mare. By the time I smelled the smoke—" He stopped. He saw it, the orange light against the night sky, the heat, the sound his wife, Mary, had made, a sound he still heard in the wind. "I couldn't get back in. The front door it was just flame. I lost them both, Mary and the boy." He picked up his coffee cup, realized it was empty, and set it back down. "This is all that's left," he said, gesturing to the new, paler wood of the repaired walls. The fire had taken half the house 5 years ago. He had been rebuilding it, slowly, poorly, ever since. Never saw the point in finishing, or the point in leaving. "Nothing out there for me. Nothing in here either, 'cept the quiet." He looked over at her. She was watching him. Not his face, but his hands, which were clenched on the table. Her past was a raw wound. His was an old scar. But in that room, they were just 2 people, trapped by the snow. The nights were the worst for her. The trauma that sleep held at bay during the day came for her in the dark. Silas woke to the sound, a low moan that built into a raw, strangled scream. He was out of his chair instantly, his hand grabbing the rifle he kept leaning against the wall. The cabin was dark, the fire embers glowing a dull red. He saw her on the cot, thrashing, fighting the blankets as if they were ropes, as if they were hands. He crossed the room. He did not light the lamp. He did not touch her. He did not speak. He pulled up the small, 3-legged stool he used for milking and sat down near the cot. He placed the rifle across his knees. He just sat. He sat while she wept and fought phantoms in the dark. He sat while her breathing slowly calmed from ragged gasps to shuddering sighs. He sat until the gray light of dawn crept back into the room, when she finally fell into an exhausted, true sleep. He got up, put more wood on the fire, and started the coffee. It happened again the next night, and the night after. Each time, he would wake, grab his rifle, and sit on the stool. He became a fixture in her darkness. He was a quiet, solid presence that did not ask, did not demand, and did not try to comfort. He was just there, a guardian. Her vulnerability stirred something in him he thought had died with his family. It was not desire. It was simpler. It was the blunt, animal instinct to protect. He found himself checking the door latch twice before turning in. He stacked the firewood closer to her cot, so the warmth would last longer through the night. And for Clara, his silence became a shield. He did not ask her what happened. He did not ask who tied her to that post. He did not ask about the bruises or the fear in her eyes. He demanded nothing. His silence was the first safe space she had known in months. It was a blank wall where she could rest her exhausted mind, free from judgment, free from questions. The blizzard broke. The world outside turned a blinding, brilliant white under a sharp blue sky. The cold remained, deep and biting. They had settled into a routine. He tended the livestock. She, now stronger, straightened the cabin, her movements slow, cautious. She found his sewing kit and mended the tears in his coat, her stitches small and perfect. One evening, they sat by the fire. The cabin was quiet, the wind just a low moan around the eaves. Clara was shivering, despite the blanket. The chill was deep in her, a thing the fire could not quite reach. Silas watched her for a moment. He got up and went to the large wooden trunk at the foot of his own bed. He opened it. The smell of cedar and memory filled the small space. He pulled out a heavy buffalo fur coat, old but well cared for. It had been Mary's. He walked over to Clara. She tensed, watching him approach. He did not speak. He unfolded the coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was huge on her, swallowing her small frame, but the warmth of it was instant, heavy. His hand brushed her shoulder as he settled the fur around her. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She looked up at him. It was the first time. Her eyes, dark and haunted, met his. It was a long, steady gaze. He saw the fear in them, but beneath it, he saw an exhaustion that matched his own. He saw the ruin. Her hand, the one with the blackened fingertips, lifted from beneath the coat. Slowly, trembling, she reached out and touched the back of his scarred hand. It was not a caress. It was a question. A simple, brief press of her cold skin against his. A jolt went through him, a feeling so foreign he almost recoiled. It was life. He pulled his hand back. Not unkindly, just breaking the contact. He returned to his chair and stared into the fire, his jaw tight. The moment hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Clara looked away, her gaze falling on the small, cracked piece of mirror Silas kept nailed to the wall, the one he used for shaving. She saw her reflection. She saw the hollows under her eyes, the gray tint of her skin. She saw the ugly, fading bruise that still stained her cheekbone, a sickly yellow-purple. Her hair was matted, lifeless. She saw what he saw, a stray, a broken thing, a ruined woman. The shame, which had been dormant, flooded back, hot and acidic. He had looked at her. He had seen her, and she had touched him. She pulled the heavy fur coat tighter, hiding herself within its depths. She turned her face away from him, toward the shadows in the corner. "Don't look at me like that," she whispered, her voice thick. "Please." The end of the blizzard left the world muffled and unnaturally bright. The silence that settled over the high plains was vast, broken only by the drip of melting snow from the eaves and the sharp crack of an ice-laden branch giving way. Inside the cabin, the routine of survival shifted. Clara, still weak, began to move. She would not be idle. She would not be a burden. She started by sweeping the floor, her movements slow, the broom heavy in her grasp. She cleaned the tin plates with a silent, focused energy, scrubbing them with ash and water until they shone. She was repaying a debt, not for the rescue. That was too large and terrible a thing to consider, but for the broth, the wool blankets, the space he gave her. One afternoon, she found his mending kit. It was a crude affair. A few thick needles, a spool of coarse thread, and a lump of beeswax. His work shirt, the one he wore daily, was ripped at the shoulder, a long tear from snagging on wire. She took it while he was in the barn. She sat by the fire, the heavy cloth draped over her lap. Her fingers, still stiff and tender from the frostbite, moved with a surprising grace. She did not use his thick thread. From the hem of her own ruined dress, the one he had bundled into a corner, she pulled a few fine, strong threads of silk. When Silas returned, stamping snow from his boots, he found the shirt folded on the table. He picked it up. He ran his thumb over the repair. The stitches were nearly invisible, a tight, perfect line that drew the rough fabric together seamlessly. It was the work of a lady, or a seamstress. It was not the work of a saloon girl. He looked at her. She was adding wood to the fire, her back to him. He put the shirt on. The mended shoulder felt stronger than the rest of the fabric. He said nothing. But that night, he left an extra ration of dried apples by her cot. The small efforts became their new language. He would chop extra wood, stacking it neatly inside, closer to the hearth. She would take the hardtack and soak it, frying it in the small amount of bacon grease he kept, making something almost palatable. They moved around each other in the small space with a careful, practiced distance. The silence stretched, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the scrape of her spoon in the pot, the rasp of his whetstone on his knife. One morning, the air was so clear and cold it hurt the lungs. He was pulling on his heavy coat, preparing to check his traps. She was standing by the window, staring at the blinding white of the plains. "Why?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning stillness. He paused, his hand on the door latch. "Why what?" "Me," she said, her gaze still fixed on the snow. "You found me. Why did you not just—" "Right on. Why bring me here?" Silas looked at the back of her head. He thought of the fence post, the ropes, the ice in her hair. He thought of the brutal, casual cruelty of it. He shrugged, a gesture hidden by the heavy coat. Didn't feel right. He opened the door and stepped out, letting the cold air rush in. He did not want to examine it further than that. It was an impulse, like pulling a calf from a bog. You did it because you had to. You did not stand there and wonder why. Clara watched him walk toward the tree line, his tall frame a dark shape against the snow. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Didn't feel right. It was the simplest, most honest answer she had ever received from a man. She did not press. She understood. The truce between them, however, was fragile. It was built on the shared ground of their isolation, but beneath it, their separate pains throbbed. A few days later, the cold snapped again, a bitter, lingering cold that sunk deep into the wood of the cabin, deep into his bones. Silas sat by the fire, long after she had retreated to her cot. He was rubbing his bad leg, his jaw tight, his knuckles white. The old wound from the war always spoke loudest in the deep cold. Clara watched him from the shadows of her bed. She had seen him do this many nights, a private ritual of pain. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice soft. He grunted, his hand stilling on his thigh. "It's an old ache. Does it ever get lonely?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "The quiet." He looked over at her, his eyes dark in the firelight. "I like the quiet." "I don't mean the quiet," she said, sitting up, the blanket pooled around her waist. "I mean," she faltered, searching for the word. The lack, do you ever miss being touched?" The question landed in the cabin like a heavy stone dropped in a still pond. The air crackled. Silas froze. His hand, which had been rubbing his leg, clenched into a fist. He stared at her, his expression hardening. He saw his wife, Mary, her hand on his chest in the dark. He felt the phantom weight of his son, asleep on his shoulder, and then he felt the raw, aching void that had replaced them. His jaw tightened until a muscle jumped. He said nothing. He stood up, the movement abrupt, violent. The stool he was on scraped loudly against the floor. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the cabin, slamming the door so hard a puff of soot fell from the chimney. Clara flinched, pulling the blanket to her chin. She had gone too far. She had touched the raw nerve. He did not come back for hours. He chopped wood. He chopped wood until a new stack stood taller than he was, until the sweat was freezing on his brow and his shoulders screamed in protest. He was trying to exorcise the feeling she had woken up. It was not just longing. It was guilt. To miss touch was to betray the dead. When he finally returned, he was cold and silent. He didn't look at her. He banked the fire and went to his bed. The tension in the cabin became a living thing. It was thick, almost suffocating. They held back from each other. Clara, because she was ashamed. She was the fallen woman who had spoken of touch, who had reminded him of the flesh. She saw the disgust in his stiff back and felt it was deserved. Silas held back because he was guilty. She had woken the man in him, and that man felt like a traitor to the husband and father who had died in the fire. He looked at Clara and felt a pull, a deep, unnerving current of desire, and he hated himself for it. They lived this way for a week. The truce was broken. One night, the wind picked up again, a low, mournful sound. They sat in their usual places, the fire between them, the silence stretching. Silas was cleaning his rifle, the smell of gun oil sharp in the air. Clara stared into the flames. She was thinking of the gas lamps, of the piano, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "I used to sing," she said. Her voice was so low he almost missed it. He stopped rubbing the cloth on the barrel. He did not look at her. He waited. She hummed, a melody he did not recognize. It was a simple tune, a sad ballad about a lost love and a long journey home. Then she began to sing. Her voice was not strong. It was rusty, thin, and cracked with disuse. But beneath the rust, there was a purity, a clear, sweet tone that filled the small cabin. "The mountains are cold, my love," she sang. "The valleys are deep and wide, but I would cross them all, my love, to be there by your side." She sang the first verse, her eyes on the fire. She was lost in it. Her hands clasped in her lap. She started the second verse, her voice gaining a small measure of strength. I remember your hands, my love, the kindness in your eyes. Her voice broke. The memory associated with the song, or perhaps with all songs, rushed in. It was not the memory of the applause. It was the memory of a back room, of a locked door, of a man's voice telling her to sing for him, and only for him. His breath hot on her neck. A sob caught in her throat. She choked on the words, her hands flying to her mouth. She bent forward, her shoulders shaking. Silas did not move. He did not go to her. He did not offer a word of comfort. He just sat, the rifle heavy in his lap, and listened to the sound of her quiet, desperate weeping. He sat, a silent sentinel, guarding her sorrow in the dim light of the fire. The thaw came in earnest. The world turned to mud and slush, and with the thaw, the world returned. Silas heard the horses first, a sound he had not heard in weeks. He looked out the window. 3 riders were making their way up the muddy track to his cabin. Clara saw the look on his face. Panic seized her. Who is it? My seasonal hands, he said, his voice flat. He looked at her. Go, up in the loft. Stay quiet. She scrambled up the ladder, hiding herself in the shadows behind the stacked trunks and spare tack. She pressed her face to a crack in the floorboards, her heart hammering. Silas opened the door just as the men were dismounting. McCrae! A big, bearded man yelled. Heard the storm nearly buried you. Thought we'd check if you were still breathing. I'm breathing. Jed, Silas said, not moving from the doorway. What do you need? Supplies, Jed said, stomping mud off his boots. He and the other 2, a wiry man named Riley and a young, sharp-faced kid named Pike, pushed past Silas into the cabin. They brought the smell of the outside world, wet horses, tobacco, and whiskey. Place is cleaner than I remember, Riley noted, looking around. Jed stopped. He saw the cot in the corner, the one that was not Silas's. He saw the extra tin cup on the table. He saw the small, mended shirt Silas was wearing. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. Well, now, Jed said, nudging Riley. Looks like the boss found himself some company to wait out the storm. Who's that? Pike asked, his voice cracking. He was pointing up. In the loft. Clara had shifted, and a shadow had given her away. Silas's body went rigid. That's not your concern, Pike. But Pike was young and foolish. He squinted into the dimness. His eyes widened. I'll be... He breathed, a look of stunned recognition on his face. I know her. That's Clara Bell, from the Nightingale over in Cheyenne. The name dropped into the cabin, and the air changed. Jed and Riley turned, their grins turning greasy. Clara Bell, Riley mused, rubbing his chin. He whispered to Jed, but his whisper was loud enough to carry in the small room. She's the one who got tangled up with the preacher's son. Caleb Marsh, heard she near ruined him, seduced him, stole from him. Heard she was common property, Jed whispered back, his eyes glinting as he stared at the loft. Preacher Marsh had her run out of town on a rail, or something close to it. Shut your mouth, Jed, Silas said. His voice was not loud. It was low, flat, and colder than the ice storm. "Aw, boss, we're just talking," Pike said, emboldened, his eyes still fixed on the shadows. "Ain't no secret what she is. She as good as they say. Clara Bell." Silas moved faster than any of them expected. He did not draw his gun. He did not raise his voice. He crossed the 2 feet between them and struck Pike across the face with the back of his hand. It was not a slap. It was a blow. The sound was a sharp crack, like wood splitting. Pike stumbled back, crashing into the table, blood pouring from his nose. Jed and Riley reached for their guns. "Don't," Silas said. He had not moved, but the rifle was suddenly in his hands, leveled at Jed's chest. "Jed, take your men. Get your supplies from the shed. You're not working for me this season." "Silas, he's just a kid," Jed protested, his hands raised. "He didn't mean nothing. We all heard the stories." "I don't care about stories," Silas said. "And I don't care that he's a kid. He disrespected the house. Get out." "You're firing us? Over her?" Riley spat, gesturing to the loft. "Now," Silas said. The men saw the look in his eyes. It was the look he'd had at Antietam. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose and had already made his decision. They backed out of the cabin, muttering curses. Pike was sobbing, holding his bloody nose. Silas watched them saddle up and ride away. He slammed the door, the wood vibrating in the frame. He bolted it. The cabin was silent. But the rumors, the shame, the filth of the outside world was now inside with them. From the loft, he heard a small, broken sound. Clara came down the ladder. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. She was wrapped in the buffalo coat, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terror he had not seen since the first night. She walked past him, her feet unsteady. She did not look at him. "Clara," he said. She fumbled with the bolt on the door, her hands clumsy. "Where are you going?" "Let me go," she whispered. Her voice choked. "You heard them. That is what I am. I bring filth. I bring trouble. I am poison. It's 20 miles to town. You'll freeze before you get a mile," he said, his voice hard. "It doesn't matter." She finally got the bolt undone and pulled the door open. A cold, damp wind rushed in. "It's better than this. You should have left me on that post. It would have been cleaner." She ran. She ran out into the mud and the slush, stumbling toward the barn. Silas watched her go. For a long second, he considered letting her. It would be easier. His life could go back to the quiet, empty ache he understood. He cursed, grabbed his own coat, and went after her. He found her in the barn. It was dark, smelling of hay and animals. A cold, miserable rain had begun to fall, hammering on the tin roof. She was trying to saddle his horse, the big gray. Her hands were shaking so badly. She couldn't buckle the cinch. She was sobbing in frustration, beating her small fists against the saddle. "I told you to stop," he said from the doorway. She whirled around, her face streaked with tears and mud. "Let me go," she screamed at him, the sound torn from her. "Why do you care? You heard them. It's all true. I'm what they say I am. I'm a whore." He walked toward her, his boots heavy on the packed earth floor. The rain drummed louder, a deafening roar. He stopped directly in front of her. She was breathing hard, cornered. "I don't care what happened before," he said, his voice low and intense, cutting through the sound of the rain. "You don't owe me for that. You don't owe them." He reached out, not to grab her, but to brace his hand on the stall next to her head. He was close enough to feel the frantic tremor running through her body. "You deserve better now." She stared at him. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever defended her. They had only accused, or used, or pitied. The fight went out of her. It drained away, leaving her hollow. She let out a ragged breath and her legs gave way. She slumped forward, her forehead pressing against the rough wool of his coat. Her shoulders shook with a dry, racking grief. Silas stood stiffly, a wall against her collapse. He was unused to this, unused to holding a living, weeping woman. His hands, awkward and scarred, came up. He hesitated, then rested them on her back, one on her shoulder, one on her hair. He just held her, his jaw set, as she cried out all the shame and fear she had held inside. They stood like that for a long time, the rain pounding on the roof, the horse shifting impatiently beside them. Finally, he guided her back to the cabin. The rain had soaked them both to the skin. They were shivering, their teeth chattering. Inside, the fire was burning low. The room was cold. The tension that had been broken by the ranch hands had returned. But it was different. It was no longer about shame and guilt. It was raw, exposed, and trembling on the edge of something new. They stripped off their wet outer layers in silence, on opposite sides of the room. He built the fire back up, the flames roaring to life. Clara stood wrapped in a dry blanket, her wet hair plastered to her neck, her body still shaking. He turned from the fire and looked at her. His gaze was steady. The distance was gone. He saw the bruises, now faded to yellow ghosts. He saw the rope scars on her wrists. He saw the woman who had sung by his fire and the woman who had tried to flee into a storm. She held his gaze. Her fear was still there, but beneath it was something else, a flicker of defiance, a desperate, pleading hunger. She walked toward him. She did not stop until she was standing directly in front of him. So close the heat from the fire scorched her back. Her hands were trembling. "Untie me," she whispered. His brow furrowed. He did not understand. "Clara? The ropes," she said, her voice a raw thread. She held up her wrists, palms out, offering him the puckered, angry scars. "I still feel them, even when I sleep. They're still tied." She looked at his eyes, her own swimming with tears she refused to let fall. "I crave," she whispered, the words stolen from her. "Please, untie me." He understood then. It was not about ropes. It was about the men who had put them there. It was about the preacher's son, the rumors, the cellar, the shame. His hands, calloused and rough, came up. He did not grab her. He cupped her wrists, his thumbs tracing the raised lines of the scars. His touch was so light it was barely a touch at all. It was an acknowledgement. He held her wrists, not in capture, but in release. He lowered his head and, like a ritual, like a prayer, he pressed his lips to the scar on her left wrist. He tasted the salt of her skin. She shuddered, a breath escaping her. He moved to the right, kissing the other scar. He was untying the knots of her trauma, one by one. She let out a long, trembling sigh, as if a wire inside her had finally snapped. He raised his head. His eyes were dark, filled with a desire that was so deep it was almost pain. He lifted her. It was not gentle. It was not rough. It was necessary. He carried her the few feet to the bearskin rug in front of the hearth, laying her down in the warm, flickering light. He did not undress her. He unwrapped her, pulling the blanket away, his eyes never leaving hers. He was searching for her fear, and when he saw it, he did not turn away. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to flee. She did not flee. When he finally touched her, it was a collision. It was not the soft coupling of lovers. It was the desperate, crashing union of two ruined people. It was a claiming. For her, it was the first time her body was being taken not in violence, but in a surrender she controlled. For him, it was the first time in 5 years he had allowed himself to be a man, and the guilt and the need tore at him. It was slow. It was intense. It was a fierce exploration of pain and pleasure, of fear and absolute surrender. He kissed the fading bruises on her skin. She clung to him, her fingers digging into the scars on his back, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had tried to drown her. After, they lay tangled in the blanket on the rug. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dull red glow over their slick skin. The cabin was utterly silent. The rain had stopped. Neither of them spoke. There were no words for what had happened. It was too large, too raw, too terrifying. It was an exorcism. It was a beginning. And in the dark, for the first time since she had woken in the snow, Clara Belle Hart finally felt the ropes fall away. The morning light was a cold, gray wash over the bearskin rug. Silas woke first, the weight of her head on his shoulder, her arms slung across his chest. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, his mind a battlefield. He felt the profound, aching guilt of betraying his wife's memory. He had brought another woman into their home, into their life. But beneath the guilt was a feeling he had not known for 5 years. It was not just desire. It was warmth. Clara stirred, her breath catching as she realized where she was, who she was with. She pulled back quickly, sitting up, pulling the wool blanket to cover herself. The memory of the night, of her raw, whispered plea, rushed in, and her face burned with shame. Silas sat up, his back to her. The cabin was cold. He reached for his shirt, his movement stiff. "I'll start the fire," he said, his voice gruff. The silence of the morning was worse than the silence of the storm. That had been the silence of strangers. This was the silence of two people who had crossed a line neither of them knew how to navigate. He made coffee, his back to her. He handed her a cup. His fingers brushed hers, and she flinched, pulling her hand away as if she had been burned. He did not acknowledge it. "The fence by the creek," he said, pulling on his boots. "The melt will have weakened the posts." "I can help," she said, her voice small. He nodded. "Get your coat." They worked for hours in the cold, wet mud. The ground sucked at their boots. He dug new holes, his muscles straining, the work a welcome punishment. She helped him stretch the new wire, her hands, still healing, gripping the cold metal until her knuckles were white. They did not speak. They were terrified. The new trust between them, the thing that had been forged in the dark, felt as fragile as a thin sheet of ice. A wrong word, a misplaced look, and it would crack, plunging them back into the cold. He showed her how to twist the wire, his large, scarred hand guiding her smaller one. "Tighter," he said. It was the only word he spoke for an hour. She focused on the work, on the cold wire, on the mud on her boots. She focused on anything but the man beside her, the man who had kissed her scars, the man who had looked at her with something other than pity or disgust. When the fence was patched, they stood back. The line was straight and strong. "It will hold," he said. "Yes," she replied, not looking at him. "It's a good fence." They walked back to the cabin, the tension stretching between them, tighter than the wire they had just pulled. The rider came 3 days later. Silas saw him from the window, a dark shape moving steadily across the thawing plains. This man was not one of the fired hands. He rode tall, with a purpose. "Get in the loft," Silas said, his voice flat. Clara's head snapped up. She had been kneading a small, sad lump of dough. "Who? Don't ask. Just go, and stay quiet." She scrambled up the ladder, pulling it up after her, and hid in the dark shadows behind a stack of old trunks. She found a crack in the floorboards, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silas opened the door before the man could knock. He stood on the porch, rifle in his hand, held loosely at his side. The man was wearing a deputy's star. His face was chapped raw by the wind. "Morning," the deputy said, reining in. "You Silas McCrae?" "I am. Deputy Hatch, from Cheyenne." "Making the rounds, checking on settlers after the big storm." "You fared well." "We fared," Silas said, his body blocking the doorway. Hatch's gaze was sharp. It moved past Silas, trying to pierce the gloom of the cabin. "Heard you let your hands go, Jed Sawyer and his crew." "That's my business." Hatch spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the mud. "It is, just, Jed was talking in town. Said you ran him off on account of a woman you were hiding." Silas said nothing. His grip on the rifle did not change. "We're looking for a woman," Hatch continued, "asking all the settlers. Name of Clara Bell Hart, singer from the Nightingale. You'd know the place." "In the loft." Clara put a hand over her mouth to stifle her breath. "Supposedly, she got herself tangled with Preacher Marsh's son, Caleb," the deputy said, his voice laced with a casual disdain. "Took him for a lot of money. They say, seduced him, cleaned him out, and ran." Silas's face was stone. "Preacher Marsh is offering a reward, and the law wants her for theft. Last seen heading north, on a horse that went lame. Small woman, dark hair, pretty, if you like 'em ruined." He leaned forward on his saddle horn. "You seen anyone like that? McCrae, any strays come asking for shelter?" Silas stared at the deputy. He thought of the fence post, the frozen ropes, the raw wounds on her wrists. He thought of her voice, cracking as she tried to sing. "No one's passed this way since before the snow," Silas said, his voice flat. "And no one's here now but me." Hatch held his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. He looked at the cabin, at the thin plume of smoke from the chimney. He looked at Silas, a man known for his reclusion and his temper. "All right," Hatch said finally, pulling his horse around. You keep an eye out. She's meant to be dangerous, clever." "I will," Silas said. He watched until the deputy was a small dot on the horizon. He closed the door, the heavy thud echoing in the small room. He stood with his back to the ladder for a long time. "He's gone," he said. Clara came down, her face white, her hands clenched so tightly her nails were biting into her palms. "He lied," she whispered. She was trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, violent rage. "Seduction? Theft? That is the story he told. The story Caleb told." Silas turned, his face dark. He said nothing. He just waited. "He said he wanted to save me," she said, her voice thick with self-loathing. She began to pace, a trapped animal, from the door to the hearth. "Caleb Marsh, he said he loved me. He quoted scripture at me. He told me I was a fallen dove, and he would wash me clean. I believed him." She stopped, her back to Silas, staring into the low flames of the fire. "When I wouldn't be his secret, he wouldn't let me leave. He told his father I was having a crisis of faith, that I needed to repent in isolation. He locked me in the church basement." Silas's hand, resting on the back of a chair, tightened. The wood groaned. "He kept me there. I don't know how long. He came to me, in the dark. He said he was purging my sin. He called it God's correction." She was choking on the words, the shame burning her throat. The money I stole. It was my money. Everything I had saved. He took it. He said it was the devil's wage and he was confiscating it for the church." Silas was seething. It was a cold, quiet rage that settled deep in his gut. He knew men like Caleb Marsh, men who hid their rot behind a righteous collar. "I got out," she continued, her voice dead. I hit him with a heavy candlestick and I ran into the street, screaming. He ran out after me. He tore his own shirt and he pointed at me, yelling, 'Thief, harlot, his father, the preacher.' He came out onto the church steps and he called me Jezebel. He told the town I had tried to seduce his son, that I had stolen from the house of God." She turned to face him, her eyes wide and dry, the memory too horrible for tears. "They believed him. They always believe the man in the collar. A mob. They got a rope. Silas. They were going to hang me. In the street. For moral corruption. How did you get away?" His voice was rough. "A man. The piano player from the saloon. He fired his gun, caused a panic. He shoved me toward the livery and told me to ride and never look back. So I ran. I ran until my horse gave out, and then I kept running. Until they found me." "Who?" "His men, the preacher's men. They found me walking. They said they weren't going to hang me. They were going to let the wilderness pass God's judgment. So they tied me to your fence." The story hung in the air, ugly and complete. Silas walked to the window. He stared out at the land, his back rigid. He was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. It was the calm of a man deciding on a course of violence. Clara saw that stillness, and it scared her more than any outburst. "You have to let me go," she said, her voice breaking. "Now, you have to. That deputy, he'll talk. He'll say he was here. He'll mention Jed's story. They will come here. They will find me." "Let them," Silas said, not turning. "No!" She ran to him, grabbing his arm. It was like holding onto a stone pillar. "You don't understand these men. They are righteous. They have God on their side, which means they can do no wrong. They will ruin you. They will kill you for harboring me. I won't. I won't be the one who brings that to you." She looked up at his harsh profile, her eyes pleading. "You saved my life. Don't make me the reason you lose yours. Please, Silas, just let me go. I'll take my chances in the mountains." He turned his head slowly and looked down at her. His eyes were dark, his resolve absolute. He reached up and put his hand over hers, the one that was gripping his arm. "No," he said. The word was final. That night, the cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing in. The threat was no longer a distant memory. It was a deputy on horseback, a man named Caleb, a lynch mob. Death was coming for them, and the snows could not hide them forever. Clara watched him bank the fire. He was going to die. He was going to die because of her. The shame she had felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a guilt that poisoned her blood. She could not bear it. She could not bear his quiet, stubborn sacrifice. She went to him. He turned, surprised by her closeness. She did not speak. Words were useless. Words were what had ruined her. She reached up, her hands trembling, and placed them on his chest. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart, a heart that was still beating only because he had been too stubborn to leave her on a fence post. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was not the desperate animal collision of the rainy night. This was different. This was a plea. It was urgent, pleading, and desperate for connection. It was the kiss of a woman who was drowning, not in water, but in fear and guilt. She was not offering her body. She was offering her terror, her brokenness, begging him to hold it, to prove she was more than just a plague. Silas was shaken to his core. The first time had been his own buried need. This was all her. He felt the raw, emotional weight of her desperation. She was not craving release. She was craving life. She was craving a reason. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. His kiss was an answer. It was not gentle. It was a promise. It was an anchor. He lifted her, his arms like steel bands, and carried her to his bed. Not the rug. His bed. The bed he had built. The bed where his son had been conceived. The bed where his wife had died. The ghosts in the room screamed. He did not care. The living woman in his arms was real. They made love with a frantic, desperate energy. It was not about pleasure. It was a defiance. It was a way of shouting into the void that they were still alive. Each touch, each kiss, was a strike against the men who were coming, against the preacher, against the grave. In the morning, the harsh light of reality returned. Clara walked to the corner where the tattered, frozen rags of her saloon dress lay, the symbol of Clarabelle Hart, the symbol of her shame. Silas watched her. He saw her staring at the bundle. He went to the large wooden trunk at the foot of his bed, the one he never opened. He lifted the heavy lid. The smell of cedar and dried lavender, faint and heartbreaking, rose up. He pulled out a coat. It was not the heavy buffalo fur. It was a woman's coat, made of thick, dark green wool. It was simple, respectable, and warm. It had been Mary's. He held it out to her. Clara looked at the coat, then at his face. "I can't," she whispered. That was hers." "She's gone," he said, his voice gruff, thick with an emotion he refused to name. "She has no use for it. You're cold." He pushed it into her hands. "It's yours now." Clara clutched the coat. It was an offering. It was an absolution. It was a shield. He was not just hiding her. He was clothing her, claiming her, covering her shame with his own past. She slid her arms into the sleeves. It was a little large, but it was warm and solid. She looked at him, her eyes shining. Then she turned, picked up the ruined silk dress, and walked to the hearth. She fed the rags to the fire, one piece at a time, watching the gaudy colors shrivel, blacken, and turn to ash. 4 days passed. 4 days of quiet preparation. The tension was a coiled spring. Then, another rider. This one was different. He was not Law. He was lean, with pale eyes and a hunger to him. He led a pack mule. He had 2 pistols tied low on his hips. "Sell her," Silas said. His hand was already on his rifle. He pulled back the bearskin rug, revealing the trap door. "Get in, and no matter what you hear, Clara, you do not make a sound." She looked at him, her eyes wide with terror. "Silas, do it!" She slipped into the small, dark hole, pulling the door down. He kicked the rug back over it, leaving a small gap for air, then sat in his chair, the rifle across his lap. The man knocked, but did not wait. The door creaked open. "That's a cold welcome, rancher," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. He smiled, a thin, unpleasant baring of yellow teeth. "Name's Harlan. You're on private land," Silas said. Harlan's pale eyes swept the room. They missed nothing. They saw the mended shirt on a peg. They saw the 2 tin cups. They saw the cot, still neat, and the main bed, which was not. "Just looking for a woman," Harlan said, stepping inside. "You're the second man to ask." "I told Deputy Hatch, I've seen no one." "Hatch is looking for a criminal," Harlan said, his smile widening. "I'm looking for a payday." He pulled a rolled paper from his coat and tossed it onto the table. It uncurled. From the darkness, through the crack, Clara could see it, a crude, wood-block drawing of her face, and the words, "Wanted, Clara Bell Hart, $500. $500, Harlan said, his eyes on Silas. "That's a lot of money. Could finish this cabin, buy a man a whole new start." Silas did not look at the poster. He looked at Harlan. "I told you, she's not here." Harlan's gaze drifted to the floor, to the bearskin rug. He sniffed the air. "Funny, I smell lavender, faint, like a woman's trunk." "That's my wife's trunk," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "She's been dead 5 years. You're smelling ghosts. Harlan." "Maybe." Harlan took a step toward the rug. "I wouldn't," Silas said. The rifle was no longer on his lap. It was leveled at Harlan's chest. Harlan stopped. He studied Silas. He saw the scars. He saw the deadness in his eyes. He recognized a man who had already lost everything. "She ain't worth it. McCrae," Harlan rasped. "No woman is, especially not that one. She's poison. Get off my land," Silas said. Harlan held up his hands, that thin smile still on his face. All right. I'll be in the area. Camped up in the canyons. When you decide $500 spends better than a used-up saloon girl, you come find me." He backed out of the cabin. Silas did not move from his chair for a full hour. His rifle pointed at the door. When he was sure Harlan was gone, he pulled back the rug and opened the trap door. Clara climbed out. She was pale, but she was not crying. Her fear was burning away, leaving something hard and cold in its place. "He'll be back," she said. "I know," Silas said. "And Caleb will come. We can't stay here." It was the first time he had said we. The next day, the trust between them deepened, settling from passion into partnership. Silas was rubbing his jaw, the stubble rough. "You look like a wild man," she said, her voice quiet. She found his sewing scissors. "I can fix that, if you'll let me." He sat on the stool. He trusted her. He trusted her with the story of his wife. He trusted her with his bed. He trusted her with a blade at his throat. Her fingers were gentle. Sure, she trimmed his hair, cutting away the shagginess, her knuckles brushing his temples. She trimmed his beard, her touch light. It was the most intimate thing they had done, this quiet, domestic act. When she finished, the man beneath the grief was visible again. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Now," he said, standing. "My turn." He took the rifle from the wall and led her outside. "You can't run," he said. "Not like before. That bounty hunter, the preacher's son, they won't stop. You have to be able to stand." He handed her the rifle. The weight of it surprised her, pulling her arms down. "I don't know how," she said. "I'll teach you." He stood behind her, his body pressed against her back, his arms coming around to help her support the weapon. He smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and gunpowder. "Plant your feet," he murmured, his voice in her ear. "Breathe out. Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it. Slow." He put his hand over hers on the stock, his finger over hers on the trigger. "Like this?" The rifle roared, bucking against her shoulder, the sound slamming into her. The bullet kicked up mud far to the left of the tin can he had set on a post. "Again," he said. They spent the day. He taught her to load, to aim, to breathe. He was patient, his voice calm. Her shoulder ached, turning purple with bruises. Near dusk, she fired. The tin can vanished from the post. She turned to him, her face smudged, her eyes shining with a fierce, new light. That night, they did not go to bed. Silas spread a piece of old parchment on the table, a map he had drawn from memory. "We're trapped," he said. "Harlan's in the canyons. Hatch is watching the south. Caleb will come from the east." "What's west?" she asked. "The mountains," he said, his finger tracing a high, dangerous line. "It's hard country, but I know a way through. There's a town. On the other side, I know a man there. He can get us papers. A new name for you." She stared at the map. "You would? You would leave this? Your ranch? Your home?" Silas looked around the dark, half-finished cabin. He looked at the empty chair where Mary used to sit. "This is a grave," he said. "It's not a home. Not anymore." He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. "I'm not doing it for you, Clara. I'm doing it with you." They began to pack. Dried meat, bullets, coffee. They were no longer hiding. They were planning an escape. The arrangement was made in secret. Silas rode out one morning before dawn, not telling her where he was going. He was gone for 2 full days, a time that gnawed at Clara, leaving her alone with the rifle, the ghosts, and the growing certainty that Harlan the bounty hunter was watching from the rocks. When Silas returned, he was grim, exhausted, and caked in mud. He dropped a small, oilskin-wrapped package on the table. "I rode to Laramie," he said, pouring coffee. "I know a man there, an engraver. He owes me, not for money." He unwrapped the package. Inside were 2 thin, folded documents, travel papers. He pushed one toward her. "Your name is Sarah Downs," he said. "Widow, traveling to Oregon to meet your brother." Clara looked at the name. Sarah. It was a plain, dull name, a name that hid. "We leave in 2 days," he said. "We'll head west over the high passes. Too cold for most, but they won't expect us to take it. We follow the creek bed into the Wind Rivers. It will be hard." He was planning. He was moving. He was giving her a new life, a new name, a way out. She pushed the paper back toward him. "No," she said. Silas stopped, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. "What do you mean? No, this is the only way." "I am tired of running," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the cold, hard thing that had replaced her fear was speaking. "I ran from the nightingale. I ran from the lynch mob. I ran from your hands when they came. I hid in the cellar. I am done hiding." "This is not hiding," Silas argued, his voice rising, harsh. "This is surviving. There is a difference." "Is there?" she said, standing. She walked to the wall where the rifle leaned, the one he had taught her to use. She picked it up. The weight was familiar now. "Sarah Downs. She's just another woman running. She's just Clara Bell Hart with a different name. She's still afraid. You should be afraid." He slammed the cup on the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. "Harlan is out there. Caleb is coming. They are not men you can fight. Clara, they are a plague." "Then I will be afraid," she said, her knuckles white on the rifle stock. "But I will be Clara. I will not be Sarah. I won't run anymore." He stared at her, this woman he had pulled from the snow. She had been a half-dead thing, a whisper. Now she stood in his cabin, in his dead wife's coat, holding his rifle, defying him. He saw the woman who had fought the ropes until her wrists were raw. The argument, the tension, the raw fear of the coming days hung in the air between them. The cabin was a tinderbox, and their proximity was the spark. They were trapped, not just by the men outside, in the cold, clear air of the plains, but by the close, suffocating intimacy of the cabin. That night, neither of them slept. He lay on his bed, she on her cot. The silence was louder than the screaming of the wind. They were waiting. The fear was a living thing, a cold presence in the room. Clara could hear him breathing, a slow, controlled sound. But she knew he was not asleep. She could feel the coiled tension in him. She rose from the cot, the blanket pooling at her feet. She walked across the cold floor. He did not move, but she knew he was watching her in the dim, red glow from the hearth's embers. She stood by his bed. "I am afraid," she whispered. He said nothing, just looked up at her, a shadow among shadows. "When I was in that cellar," she said, her voice trembling, Caleb, he told me I was unclean. He said I was a vessel of sin, and he was the only one who could purge me. His touch." She shuddered, the memory coiling in her gut. "It was cold, even when it was cold. I felt like a thing, like an object, like a stray dog he was correcting. I felt used." She looked at him, her eyes pleading in the dark. "I am so afraid I will never feel clean again. I am afraid that is all I am. A thing that men use or hunt or break." Her hand, trembling, reached for his. I don't want to feel like that. Not tonight. Silas, make me feel like I'm not used." The plea was so raw, so vulnerable. It shattered his defenses. The guilt he held for Mary, the rage he held for Caleb. It all fell away, leaving only this woman, asking not for salvation, but for validation. He sat up, his rough hands finding her waist. He pulled her down, not onto the bed, but to her knees, so they were eye to eye. He did not kiss her mouth. He took her hands, the ones with the puckered, angry scars on the wrists. He turned them palms up and pressed his lips to the raw flesh. First the left, then the right. He was kissing away the ropes. She let out a shaky breath, a half-sob. His hands moved to her face. He kissed the fading, yellowed bruise on her cheekbone. He kissed the small, pale scar on her temple, where the gag had torn the skin. "You are not unclean," he whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. His lips moved from her face to her neck, to the hollow of her throat. "You are not astray," he murmured, his hands moving to the buttons of her shift, pushing aside the rough wool of the coat. "You are not used." He kissed the swell of her breast. He laid her back on his bed, the bed that had been his and Mary's. And in that moment, the ghosts fled. There was no room for them. He shed his own clothes, and when his skin touched hers, it was not the frantic, desperate collision of the barn. It was a slow, deliberate reclaiming. He moved over her, his body a shield against the world. He kissed every mark on her skin. He was not taking, he was worshipping. He was erasing the memory of Caleb's cold touch with his own desperate, living heat. He was answering her plea, and when he finally entered her, she clung to him, weeping, not in sorrow, but in a profound, earth-shattering release. She was not being used. She was being found. The next morning, the pact was sealed. They were no longer two strangers. They were a single purpose. The argument about her name was over. They would face what was coming, together. "We still leave," he said, his voice firm as he pulled on his boots. "But we leave as us." They prepared the wagon. It was a small, sturdy buckboard. They loaded it with sacks of flour, dried beans, jerky, and heavy canvas tarps. Silas packed his tools, the axe, the saw, the auger. He packed 3 heavy boxes of ammunition. Clara packed the blankets, the iron skillet, the coffee pot, and the green wool coat. As they worked, Silas went to his writing desk, a small, unstable table in the corner. He pulled out a sheet of paper, a nib pen, and a bottle of ink. "What are you doing?" Clara asked. "If we don't make it," he said, dipping the pen. "The truth needs to. Caleb Marsh and his father can't be the only ones left to tell the story." He began to write, his large hand cramping around the small pen. He wrote to a lawyer in Cheyenne, a man named Eli Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy, I am leaving my property. I do not know if I will return. I am traveling with a woman, Clara Bell Hart. The law seeks her on charges of theft, brought by preacher Caleb Marsh. These charges are false. Miss Hart was held captive by Marsh in the basement of his church and abused. She fled for her life. The money she is accused of stealing was her own. I have seen the marks on her body. I have heard her testimony, and I believe it to be true. We are being hunted by a bounty hunter named Harlan and by Marsh himself. If you find this letter, and we are gone, know that we were not fugitives. We were victims. See that this truth is known. I leave my land in your trust. Sell it. See that any proceeds find their way to Miss Hart. If she survives. He signed it. Silas McCrae. He looked at the letter, his jaw tight. He slid it toward Clara. Is it true? She read the words, her vision blurring. He believed her. He was betting his land, his name, his very life on her word. She picked up the pen, her hand shaking. Below his signature, she wrote 2 words. It is true. She signed her own name, Clara B. Hart. He folded the paper, sealed it with wax, and placed it on the mantel, where anyone who came looking would find it. It was their testament. They were hitching the horses to the wagon. The air was cold, the sun weak. They were almost ready. Silas stopped, his hand on the harness. He lifted his head, tasting the air. Get in the house, he said. What? Now, Clara, the cellar. He was already pulling the rifle from its scabbard on the wagon. Silas, no, I won't hide. You're not hiding, he said, grabbing her arm, his fingers biting deep. He dragged her toward the cabin. You're the reserve. I can't fight them and protect you at the same time. They get me. You use the cellar grate. You run. You head west. Don't stop. Do you understand me? No, I'll fight with you. You will do as I say, he roared, shoving her toward the trap door. This is not a request. He pushed her into the cold, dark hole. You have the shotgun, 1 shell. Make it count, but only if they find you. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. He slammed the door, kicked the rug over it, and stepped onto the porch, leveling the rifle. They came from the east, 6 riders, dark shapes against the morning sun. They were not law, they were not bounty hunters. They were zealots. At the lead rode a man on a fine black horse. He was handsome, clean-shaven, and wore a clean duster. He looked like a gentleman, but his eyes, even from a distance, burned with a cold, righteous fire. It was Caleb Marsh. He reined in, holding up a hand. His 5 men spread out, flanking him, their rifles ready. Silas McCrae! Caleb's voice was not a yell. It was a clear, strong pronouncement, like a sermon. You stand on poisoned ground. Sir, you harbor a creature of sin. Silas sighted down the barrel of his rifle. You're on my land. Marsh, you and your paid men, turn around and ride out, and I'll forget I saw you. I am here on God's business, Caleb shouted, his face darkening. That woman, that thing, in your house, she is a fugitive from the law and from the Lord. She seduced me. She stole from the church. She is a harlot and a thief. She is an innocent woman you abused, Silas yelled back, his voice raw. Caleb's face twisted in rage. Liar! Blasphemer! You are as sick as she is. I demand you surrender her to me. I will see her cleansed, and I will see her hang. You'll see hell first, Silas said. Caleb smiled, a cold, thin smile. So be it. He raised his hand. She is in that cabin. Men, fetch what is mine. The world exploded. The first shot came from one of Caleb's men, splintering the door frame by Silas's head. Silas fired back. The man screamed, clutching his shoulder, and fell from his horse. The other 4 men scattered, taking cover behind the water trough, the wood pile, the unfinished wall of the barn. Gunfire ripped through the air. Bullets tore through the thin walls of the cabin, whining like angry insects, under the floor. Clara screamed as a bullet punched through the floorboards just inches from her head. Showering her with dirt and splinters, she huddled in the dark, the heavy shotgun in her lap, her body shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She could hear Silas moving above her, firing, reloading, firing again. She heard his grunts of effort, the heavy thud of his boots. The siege lasted for hours. The sun crawled high, then began its slow, cold descent. The cabin was a ruin of splintered wood and broken glass. Silas was trapped, his ammunition running low. Caleb's men were patient. They had him pinned. Clara could smell the gunpowder. The fear. She heard one of Caleb's men yell, "He's not firing back as fast. He's running out." "Smoke him out," Caleb commanded. She heard a man running toward the cabin. She heard the shattering of the window. The one by the bed. She heard a slosh of liquid. Kerosene. "Silas!" she screamed from below. Above her, she heard Silas cough. "Stay down. Clara, hold your breath." She heard him moving. A desperate, scraping sound. He was at the hearth. Then a new smell. Not kerosene, lamp oil, and then lavender. He was piling things on the fire. He was emptying the oil lamp onto them. What are you doing?" Caleb yelled from outside, confused. Silas lit the pile. Thick, acrid smoke billowed from the hearth, but it was mixed with a sweet, heartbreaking scent of dried lavender. He had thrown his wife's trunk on the fire. He was burning his past to save their future. The cabin filled with a choking, dense cloud. "He's burning her!" one of the men yelled in horror. "He's burning himself alive!" The gunfire stopped. Caleb's men coughed, their eyes watering as the wind pushed the smoke out of the broken windows. In the confusion, Silas kicked open the back door, the one that led to the barn. He burst out, low and fast, coughing, his eyes streaming. He ran, using the thick smoke as cover, disappearing into the barn. "He's in the barn!" Caleb yelled, realizing the ruse. "He's going for the horses! He's mine!" Caleb, blind with rage and a fanatical sense of ownership, ran after him, disappearing into the dark maw of the barn. "Don't let him get away!" one of the men yelled, starting to follow. "Under the floor!" Clara heard the silence. The gunfire had stopped. The shouting was farther away. The cabin was on fire. She pushed open the trap door. The room was full of smoke, but the fire was contained to the hearth. His wife's trunk, a bed of glowing, fragrant embers. He had sacrificed his memories for a smokescreen. She scrambled out, grabbing the rifle he had left for her, the one he had taught her to use. She ran out the back door, toward the barn, inside. It was dark, shadows and light cutting through the slats, dust motes dancing in the air. It smelled of hay and manure and fear. She heard a crash, the terrified whinny of a horse. Caleb and Silas were fighting. Not with guns. Their pistols were lost in the hay. It was a brutal, desperate, hand-to-hand fight. Silas was driven by a cold, protective rage. He slammed Caleb into a stall, the wood cracking. Caleb was younger, quicker, fueled by a righteous, insane fury. He drove his knee into Silas's bad leg. Silas roared in pain, but his fist connected with Caleb's jaw. They fell, rolling in the dirt and hay. Silas, stronger, heavier, got the upper hand. He was on top of Caleb, his hands, those large, scarred, clumsy hands, wrapping around Caleb's throat. "She was mine," Caleb gasped, his face turning purple, his eyes bulging. "She was never yours," Silas snarled, his rage absolute, the memory of Antietam, of killing, surging back. I cleansed her," Caleb choked, a horrific, wet smile on his lips. "She is unclean, a whore, meant for me. I saved her from hell. She begged for it. The lie was his last, most venomous weapon." "It struck home," Silas roared, a sound that was not human. He saw the rope burns. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the cellar. He squeezed, all his grief, all his guilt, all his rage focused into his hands. He was going to kill him. He was going to send this man to the hell he spoke of. "Silas!" Clara's voice cut through the red haze. He froze. His hands were still locked on Caleb's throat. He looked up. She was standing in the barn doorway, outlined by the gray afternoon light. She was holding the rifle, and it was leveled, steady. He saw the horror in her face. But it was not directed at Caleb. It was directed at him. She was watching him become a monster. She was watching him become a murderer. No better than the men in her past. He let go, as if Caleb's throat were burning him. He scrambled back, gasping, looking at his own hands, trembling and red. Caleb, freed, gasped for air, his eyes wild. He laughed, a raw, choking sound. See, she can't let you. He scrambled in the hay, his hand finding his dropped pistol. She chooses me, you animal. He raised the gun. Clara's voice was clear, cold, and it filled the barn, silencing the horses, the wind, the dying fire. You never owned me. She fired. The sound was deafening. A single, sharp crack. Caleb screamed. A high, thin sound that was almost a shriek. He dropped the pistol, his hands flying to his leg. She had not shot him in the chest. She had not shot him in the head. She had shot him clean through the thigh, just above the knee, shattering the bone. He collapsed, writhing in the hay, sobbing, the fight gone, his righteousness replaced by pure animal pain. Outside, the remaining 4 men heard the shot. They heard their leaders scream. They had seen one man fall. They looked at the smoldering cabin, at the barn, and at the oncoming night. This was not the payday they had signed up for. One of them mounted his horse. He's mad. They're both mad. I'm not dying for this. The others followed. In a flurry of panicked hooves, they fled, disappearing back over the rise, leaving their wounded leader and their dead companion behind. The silence that fell was profound. It was broken only by the crackle of the embers in the cabin and the high, pitiful weeping of Caleb Marsh. Clara stood, the rifle heavy in her arms. She was shaking, but she did not lower the weapon. Silas rose slowly, walking to her. He did not touch her. He just looked at her, at the woman who had faced her monster. She had not run, she had not hidden. She had used the rifle. She had saved him, not just from Caleb's bullet, but from his own rage. He gently took the rifle from her trembling hands. "It's over," he said. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the man bleeding in the hay. Then she looked at Silas, her gaze clear for the first time. She was free. They did not wait for the sun. They did not wait to see who might come looking for the dead or the wounded. The acrid smell of smoke, the smoke from his wife's burning memories, was thick in the air. Silas looked at Caleb Marsh, who was whimpering in the hay, his righteousness shattered by the bullet in his leg. Silas felt nothing. No pity, no anger. He was empty. He walked to the wounded man, cut a length of rope from a stall, and bound Caleb's hands tightly behind his back. "He'll live or he'll die," Silas said, his voice flat. "It's in God's hands now." He turned to Clara. "The wagon." She did not question him. She ran to the buckboard, her body moving with a new, sure purpose, while she climbed onto the seat, placing the rifle beside her. Silas strode back into the smoking cabin. The fire had mostly died, a pile of fragrant, glowing embers in the hearth. His wife's trunk was gone. The letter to Abernathy sat on the mantel, a white rectangle in the gloom. He left it. Let them find it. Let the truth be known. He grabbed the last of the ammunition and the small bag of coffee, then joined her on the wagon. He did not look back. He did not look at the grave of his wife and son, a grave he was now abandoning. He did not look at the cabin that had been his prison, or the barn that had been their battlefield. He snapped the reins, and the horses, spooked by the smell of smoke and gunfire, leapt forward. The wagon lurched, wheels finding the muddy track, and they rode west, into the deepening twilight. They traveled under the moonlight. The plains were cast in a ghostly silver, the world vast and silent. The only sound the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon. They pushed the animals hard, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the ruin of the ranch. This was the end of Clara Belle Hart. She knew it as she sat beside him, the cold wind pulling at her hair. That woman, the singer from the Nightingale, the fallen woman, the preacher's victim, she was dead. She had died in the snow and been reborn by the fire. Her identity was known, not just as a fugitive, but as the woman who had lived with Silas McCrae, the woman who had stood her ground, the woman who had shot the preacher's son. There was no going back. They stopped hours later, near midnight, to let the horses breathe and drink from a shallow, ice-rimmed creek. Silas built a small, careful fire, shielded by rocks, just enough to make coffee. He passed her a steaming tin cup. She wrapped her cold hands around it. The silence of the high plains was immense, pressing in on them. "It is my fault," she whispered, her voice stolen by the wind. Silas looked up, his face harsh in the small firelight. "What is?" "Your home, it's gone. That man, the one you shot, he's dead." She looked at him, her eyes wide and dark, filled with a guilt that was deeper than her own shame. "You are a fugitive. Silas, you've lost everything. Because of me. Everywhere I go, men get hurt because of me. I am poison, just like they said." Silas set his cup down on the frozen ground. He stared into the small, struggling flames. He thought of the long, gray years he had spent alone, his only companions the ghosts of his wife and son. He thought of the hollowness, the ache in his bad leg, the deadness in his heart. "That man," he said, his voice a low rasp, "was going to kill us. He was going to burn you alive. I feel nothing for his death, not guilt, just quiet." He looked at her, his gaze intense, cutting through the darkness. "My home, that place was a grave. Clara, I was just a ghost rattling around in it. I haven't lost everything. I had nothing to lose." He leaned forward, the firelight catching the scars on his face. "I've been hurt. I've been a broken, walking dead man for 5 years. I'm already hurt." He held her gaze, and the world seemed to stop, the wind falling silent. "You're just the reason I want to heal." She looked at him, the words striking her with the force of a physical blow. He was not her victim. He was her partner. She had no reply for such a truth. She simply nodded, a single, slow acknowledgement, and drank her coffee. They pushed west, climbing. The flat plains gave way to rolling foothills, and the foothills grew into the hard, jagged peaks of the mountains. The air grew thin and cold. The wagon strained against the steep, rocky inclines. They left the world behind, entering a realm of stone and sky. On the third night, the snow began. It did not come as a blizzard. It came as a silent, heavy curtain, a thick, determined fall of white flakes that muffled the world. It was a mirror of the storm that had first brought them together. Then, she had been tied to a post, freezing, alone, a victim. Now, she sat beside him on the wagon seat, wrapped in the green wool coat, his arm braced around her waist to keep her steady. A survivor. "We can't stay out in this," he yelled over the rising wind. "The horses will founder. We'll freeze before morning." He knew this high country. He had hunted it in his youth. He turned the wagon off the barely visible trail, guiding the exhausted horses into a thick stand of ancient pines that offered some shelter. Tucked against a sheer granite cliff was a small, dark shape, a line shack left by trappers or herders. It was barely more than a hovel, but it had 4 walls, a roof, and a rusted stovepipe jutting from the roof. They unhitched the horses, leading them into the small, 3-sided lean-to beside the shack. The animals huddled together, grateful to be out of the wind. Inside, the cabin was dark, cold, and smelled of pine needles, dust, and mice. A crude bunk was built against one wall, a broken table in the center. It was a refuge. Silas used his axe to split dry wood from a fallen pine. Soon, a fire roared in the small, rusted stove, and the one-room cabin filled with a welcome, radiating heat. They ate jerky and the last of their bread, sitting on the floor by the stove, the snow hissing and whispering against the single, grime-caked window. They were trapped, just as they had been in his cabin. But this time, the world was not pressing in on them. It was locked outside. The bunk was a narrow shelf, filled with dry, dusty straw that smelled of summers long past. There was only room for them to lie together, pressed close, under the pile of all their blankets. They lay fully clothed, their bodies sharing warmth in the cold. Isolated night. Silas lay on his back, his arm under her head, staring at the dark, rough-hewn ceiling. He listened to the wind, to the silence, to the soft, steady sound of her breathing. He thought she was asleep, but in the deepest part of the night, the terror found her. It started as a low moan, a whimper.
No, please, no, don't lock it. I'll be good. Caleb, please, it's so dark.
Silas tensed. He turned his head, looking at her in the dimness. She began to struggle, her hands clawing at the blankets, her legs kicking, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps.
The ropes! Get them off me! I can't breathe! Untie me!
She was not just having a bad dream. She was in the cellar. She was on the fence post. She was reliving it. Silas did not hesitate. He did not sit on a stool across the room. He did not watch. He acted. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest, his hold like iron, an anchor in her storm. He pinned her arms, not in violence, but in absolute, grounding safety. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, urgent command, his lips against her hair. "You are safe. I have you. Wake up. You are safe." She fought him, her body rigid with terror, a small, animal sound of pure panic trapped in her throat. "No, let me go! Let me go! He's coming!" "He is not here," Silas said, his voice firm, unwavering. He held her tighter, refusing to let her thrash, forcing her to feel his presence. "The ropes are gone. He is not here. It's just me. It's Silas. I am holding you. You are safe." His voice, his heat, the solid, unyielding reality of his arms, finally pierced the nightmare. The fight drained out of her. Her body, which had been board stiff, suddenly collapsed. She went limp, her face burying itself in his chest. A sob tore through her, a sound so raw and broken it seemed to rip from her soul. It was not a cry of fear, it was a cry of grief. He held her, he just held her, rocking her gently, his hand stroking her tangled hair. "It's all right," he whispered, over and over. "I'm here, it's all right." He held her while she wept for the girl who had sung on a stage, for the woman who had been locked in a cellar, for the shame she had carried, for the violence that had been done to her. The small, cold cabin was filled with the sound of her sorrow, and the steady, quiet hiss of the falling snow outside. He held her until the last tremor faded, until her breathing, ragged and wet, finally deepened into an exhausted, true sleep. He did not let go. He lay awake for the rest of the night, his arm aching, guarding her rest, his heart filled with a fierce, protective tenderness he thought had been burned to ash with his wife's trunk. Clara woke to the gray light of dawn. The cabin was cold, the fire long dead. She was still in his arms, her head on his chest, his breathing a slow, steady rumble beneath her ear. She tilted her head back, looking at his face in the pale light. The harsh lines were softened in sleep. He looked tired and scarred and human. His eyes opened, instantly clear, and looked directly into hers. They lay like that for a long time, the silence broken only by their breathing.
"I'm sorry,"
she whispered, her voice rough. For the night?" "Never be sorry," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Not for that." His hand, the one that had been under her head, moved to her face. His calloused thumb brushed the dampness from her cheek. He looked at her, this woman who had survived freezing, starvation, beatings, and the raw, lingering terror of her own mind, and he saw not a victim, but a partner. "I want to marry you, Clara," he whispered. The words were so sudden, so stark in the cold morning air. She thought she must have dreamed them. Her eyes widened. She instinctively started to pull away, to hide.
"Silas, you don't,"
she stammered.
"You don't have to. You're not responsible for me. I'm not a lady. I'm not—"
"Stop," he said, his hand moving to her chin, holding her gaze, gentle but firm. "I know what you are, and I know what you are not." He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering, stripping away all her defenses, all her shame. "I'm not asking you because I'm saving you. I'm not asking because you need a protector, or because you're a fallen woman who needs a name. God knows, my name is Mud. I'm a killer and a fugitive." He took a sharp breath, the admission costing him. "I'm asking, Because I'm yours. I think I have been since you first touched my hand by that fire. I'm asking because I am a broken, empty man, and you are the first thing that has felt real in 5 years. I'm asking because I want to be, because I love you. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, but they were not the tears of the nightmare. They were not the tears of shame, or fear, or guilt. It was hope. It was a feeling so new, so bright and painful in its intensity. It felt like her chest was breaking open. She cried, silent tears rolling down her face into his hand. She cried for the sheer, impossible, undeserved kindness of it. She didn't say yes, she didn't need to. She surged up, her cold lips finding his. This kiss was not the desperate plea in the cabin, not the frantic claiming of their fear. This was an answer. It was a promise. It was acceptance. Their lovemaking, in that cold, isolated cabin, was a quiet, profound thing. It was slow. It was tender. It was two scarred, broken people meticulously, gently putting each other back together. They were unbound. They were unafraid. And when they lay tangled in the blankets, the snow falling silently outside, they were, for the first time, whole. The storm lasted 2 days. When it broke, the world was blinding white, clean and new. They descended from the high mountains, the wagon wheels crunching in the deep, silent powder. The air was sharp, bright, and clean. The town they rode into was called Gold Creek. It was not like Cheyenne. It was a raw, muddy, chaotic mining town clinging to the side of a steep canyon. It was loud, bustling, and smelled of wet lumber, blasting powder, and frying bacon. Men in muddy boots filled the street, but their stares were of frank curiosity. Not judgment. Everyone here was running from something. Silas pulled the wagon up in front of a small clapboard building. Land Office Assayer, E. Abernathy, Proprietor. Clara's head snapped around. Abernathy? The lawyer you wrote to? He moved, Silas said, a rare, grim smile touching his lips. Got tired of the flatlands. Came here to chase gold, like everyone else. He's still a lawyer, and he's the only man west of the divide I trust. He stepped down from the wagon, his bad legs stiff from the cold. Wait here. Clara watched him through the window. She saw him greet a small, wire-thin man with spectacles. She saw Silas hand over a folded paper, the deed to his ranch. She watched him sign another paper, his signature large and certain. He was cutting the final anchor, selling the land, the grave that had held him for so long. He came out, his step lighter than she'd ever seen it. It's done, he said, standing by the wagon. The land is Abernathy's, in trust. He'll sell it. The money will be waiting for us, under your new name. My new name, she whispered. Clara McCrae, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her heart leaped, a painful, joyful stitch in her chest. Abernathy is sending a rider to Cheyenne. Silas went on, his face serious. He's going to file the letter. He's going to find out what happened after we left. He'll find out if we're fugitives, or just free. What do we do now? She asked, looking at the strange, loud town. Now, he said, we eat a real meal, and we wait. He led her to the largest, loudest building on the street, the Gold Nugget Saloon. Clara froze at the doorway, the blast of warm, stale air, the sound of a tinny piano and coarse male laughter washing over her. Silas, no, she said, her hand clutching his arm. I can't, not a place like this. He looked at her, his gaze gentle. You don't have to, but she looked past him, into the smoky room. She saw the rough-faced miners, the trappers, the gamblers. She saw the unmanned piano in the corner. She saw the small, crude stage. She had a choice. She could be Sarah Downs, the timid widow he had invented, a woman who hid. Or she could be Clara McCrae, the woman who had shot Caleb Marsh and earned Silas's love. She let go of his arm and walked inside. The saloon went quiet. Every man turned, watching her. They saw a woman in a respectable, but worn, green coat, her face pale, her dark hair pulled back simply. They saw the fading bruises. They saw the faint, puckered scars on her wrists. And they saw the steel in her eyes. The piano player, a young man with sad eyes, had stopped playing. Clara walked past the tables, her head held high. She walked to the small stage and climbed the 2 steps. She turned to the piano player. "Do you know the Valleys of Morn?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. He nodded, surprised. "Play it," she said. "Slow." He began. The melody simple, sad, and beautiful, cutting through the smoky air. Clara stood in the center of the stage, her hands clasped in front of her. She did not look at the men. She looked at the back wall, over their heads. She closed her eyes, and she sang. Her voice, the one that had cracked in the cabin, was clear, strong, and pure. It was not the bawdy, flirtatious shout of a saloon girl. It was the heartbreaking, honest tone of a survivor. She sang of loss and of home, and of a long, hard journey. The room was utterly silent. Men stopped drinking. Gamblers held their cards. They turned, and they listened. They heard the pain in her voice, but they also heard the strength. They heard their own loneliness, their own losses, their own faint hopes. When she finished, the last note hanging in the silent air, no one clapped. That would have been wrong. One old miner, his beard gray with rock dust, slowly took off his hat. Then another, and another. It was a sign of respect. Clara opened her eyes. She looked across the room and found Silas, who stood by the door. His face a mask of awe and a love so fierce it was painful. She had not been entertainment. She had not been used. She had taken back her voice. She had healed herself. They stayed in Gold Creek for 2 weeks, in a small, clean room above the general store. Silas found work stacking lumber, his strength valuable in a town that was building itself overnight. The rider returned from Cheyenne, his horse lathered. Abernathy found them at a small table in the back of the saloon, eating stew. He sat down, not waiting for an invitation, his face serious. "It's done," he said, his voice low. "Caleb?" Silas asked. "Alive, but he won't be walking soon," Abernathy said. "His men, the ones who fled. They rode straight to the fort. They told the soldiers you were a madman, that you had attacked them, killed one of their own, and taken Marsh hostage." Clara's blood ran cold. "But," the lawyer continued, a thin smile playing on his lips, "when the soldiers got to your ranch, they found 2 things. They found Caleb Marsh, tied up, delirious, ranting about a harlot and God's judgment, and they found your letter." He tapped a telegraph flimsy in his hand. "Your testimony, and hers, it matched the evidence. And when they got Caleb to the doctor in Cheyenne, the preacher, his father, he tried to stop them. He tried to claim she was a witch, that she had ensnared his son." Abernathy leaned in. "It didn't work. Not this time. Your story, Miss Hart, the piano player, the church cellar, the marshal in Cheyenne searched it. They found the lock. They found evidence. It seems you weren't the first girl he'd purged, just the first one to get away." "So what happens?" Clara whispered. Abernathy looked at her, his eyes full of a new respect. "Caleb Marsh is under arrest, for abduction, assault, and fraud. So is his father, for complicity. The charges against you, for theft, for seduction, they have been dropped, wiped clean." He stood up, placing the telegraph on the table. "The law is not looking for you, Miss Hart. You are no longer a fugitive." Clara stared at the paper. She looked at Silas. He took her hand across the table, his grip solid, warm, and real. She was free. They did not return to the high plains immediately. The winter in Gold Creek was hard, but it was honest. Silas worked, his strength earning good wages at the new sawmill, the sound of the blade biting into fresh pine, a clean, steady noise. Clara's voice became a fixture in the town. She sang in the saloon on Sunday afternoons, not for money, but for the miners who gathered, hats in hand, hungry for a sound that reminded them of homes they had left behind. Her voice was no longer a performance. It was a balm. They were married in the spring by a traveling circuit judge in Abernathy's office. There was no white dress, no church bells. It was a simple, legal binding, witnessed by the lawyer and a surprised assayer. Silas's hand was rough and clean as it slipped a simple gold band, bought with his sawmill wages, onto her finger. Her hand, he noted, was no longer trembling. When the thaws came, the money from the sale of the ranch, the grave, as Silas called it, was waiting. He took it. He did not buy a new, grand spread. He bought 160 acres of high-ground timber and meadow, 10 miles above the old valley, where a clear spring broke from the granite and the air was sharp with pine. He built the cabin himself, from the ground up. He felled the trees, hewed the logs, and set the stones for the foundation. It was not a repair. It was a creation. Clara worked beside him, chinking the logs with mud and straw, her hands growing calloused and strong. She helped him raise the roof beams. She planted a small garden with seeds she had bought in Gold Creek, pressing beans and squash into the dark, rocky soil. This cabin was different from the last. It was smaller, but the wood was clean and bright. The windows were new, letting in the sharp mountain light. There was no cellar, no dark loft, no shadows of a fire. It was a shelter, not a fortress. By the time the high country aspens turned gold, they had settled. Silas bought 4 wild mares, horses with fire in their eyes, and began the slow, patient work of taming them. He did not break them. He gentled them. His voice low, his movements quiet, a process of patience and trust. Clara, in turn, found her own purpose. The wife of the Gold Creek blacksmith had a daughter, a shy, thin girl of 8 named Elspeth, who would hide and listen when Clara sang to herself while hanging laundry. Clara offered to teach her. Soon, she had 3 students, who would ride up the mountain path twice a week. They sat on the new porch, their voices thin and clear, as Clara taught them melodies, her own voice, rich and whole, guiding them. They lived simply, their lives governed by the seasons, the work of their hands, and the quiet they had earned. They were private, but they were not hidden. They were free. The peace lasted almost a year. It was broken by a man on a tired horse, carrying a leather satchel. He was a summons server from Cheyenne. The Marsh family, though ruined in reputation, was still wealthy. They had lost their son to the territorial prison, their church to scandal. They were striking back with the only weapon they had left, money and the law. They were suing Clara Bell Hart, Clara McCrae, for defamation of character, claiming her malicious and false testimony had destroyed their family. They were suing her for the injury to Caleb, claiming she had shot him not in defense, but with vicious intent. The old terror, the feeling of being hunted, rushed back into Clara, cold and sickening. She dropped the summons on the floor as if it were a snake. "We can leave," Silas said, his voice flat, his eyes hard as he read the paper. "We can go to Oregon, to California. They will never find us." Clara looked out the window of the home they had built. She saw her small garden, now dormant under the first frost. She saw the new corral, where Silas's mares watched, their ears pricked forward. She looked at her hands, scarred, but strong. "No," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "I ran from them once. I hid from them. I will not run again. I will not be Sarah Downs." He nodded, his jaw set. "Then I will stand with you." The trial was held in Cheyenne. The city was a place of ghosts for her. The memory of the nightingale, the sound of the lynch mob, the face of the deputy. But she walked into the courthouse, not through the back door, but the front. She wore the green wool coat, her best simple dress, and her hair was tied back cleanly. Silas walked beside her, his presence a solid wall. He wore a suit, old and stiff, that he had bought for his own wedding, years ago. The courtroom was packed. The Marsh family sat in the front row, draped in black, their faces pale and venomous. Their lawyer was a sharp, slick man from back east. He was brutal. He put Clara on the stand and forced her to recount her past. Mrs. McCrae, or is it Miss Hart? Which name do you prefer when you are not ruining the lives of decent men? My name is Clara McCrae, she said, her hands clasped in her lap. And before that, you were Clara Bell Hart, were you not? A singer, a performer. Yes, a performer in a saloon, correct? The Nightingale? Yes, a place where men drink and gamble and purchase company. It was a saloon, she said simply. And you sang there, for these men? You accepted their money? You drank with them? You let them touch you? I sang songs, Clara said, her voice clear in the silent room. I was paid to sing. And you met Caleb Marsh there, did you not? A man of God, a preacher's son. And you, a saloon girl, saw an opportunity, did you not? Clara looked at the lawyer. He sought me out. He told me I needed saving. And did you? The lawyer sneered. Did you need saving, or did you need money? I needed peace. Clara said, Is that what you call it? You lured him. You took his money. And when he discovered your deceit, you slandered him, claiming what was it, that he locked you in a cellar? He did. A fantasy. A lie you told to cover your own theft, and when that lie was exposed, you fled. And when he pursued you, to reclaim the church's stolen funds, you and your accomplice, you ambushed him. You shot him in cold blood. Clara's gaze did not waver. She looked past the lawyer, to the judge, a stern-looking man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen everything. I was running for my life, she said. He sent men who tied me to a post in a blizzard and left me to die. My husband found me. When Caleb Marsh came to our home, he came with armed men. He shot at us. He set our house on fire. He was going to kill my husband. So you claim. The lawyer said. I did not claim it, Clara said. I lived it. I shot him to stop him from murdering my husband. That is the truth. The lawyer tried for hours to twist her words, to paint her as a seductress, a liar, a harlot. He brought up the men Silas had killed. He painted them as a pair of outlaws. But her story did not change. It was simple, unadorned, and solid. The truth had a weight that his flowery, accusatory words could not move. Silas never spoke. He sat behind her, his gaze fixed on the back of her head. He was a silent, unmovable witness to her strength. On the final day, the judge rendered his verdict. He did not deliberate for long. He peered down from his bench, his gaze settling on the Marsh family. This court has heard the testimony, he said, his voice filling the room. It has also reviewed the criminal convictions of Caleb Marsh, who is currently serving 10 years in the territorial prison for abduction, fraud, and assault against multiple women, including the plaintiff in this matter. The Marsh family lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection! That conviction is under appeal. Sit down, counselor, the judge said, his voice like iron. Reputation, which you claim has been damaged, is the shadow. Character is the tree. This family is suing Mrs. McCrae for the damage done to a shadow, while ignoring the rot in their own tree. He looked at Clara. The court finds that the plaintiff's testimony regarding her captivity was not defamation, but fact, corroborated by overwhelming evidence. The court finds that the shooting of Caleb Marsh was not a malicious act, but a justifiable act of defense. Defense of her home, and defense of her husband. He banged his gavel, the sound a sharp, clean crack. This lawsuit is a mockery, an attempt to use this court to finish what Caleb Marsh could not. It is dismissed, with prejudice. The plaintiff will pay all court costs. The room was silent. Clara sat, unmoving, the words washing over her. It was done. It was truly done. Her name, the name they had tried to twist and poison, was clean. It was hers. Silas's hand came to rest on her shoulder. His grip was firm. She reached up and placed her own hand over his. They stood, turned their backs on the sputtering rage of the Marsh family, and walked out into the cold, clean daylight. They rode home in silence, the rhythm of the horses a steady, peaceful sound. They did not need to speak. The air between them was light. The final, lingering ghost had been put to rest. That night, they reached their cabin. The moon was high and full, flooding the high meadow with pale, silver light. The mountains were black shadows against a sky overflowing with stars. Clara went inside. Silas tended to the horses. When he came in, she was waiting. She was not by the fire. She was standing by the open door, looking out at the night. She had washed, her hair damp and dark. She wore a simple, unadorned shift of white linen. She looked peaceful, the haunted look in her eyes, the one he had seen since the day he cut her from the post, was gone. She turned to him. A small, soft smile touched her lips. She held out her hands, palms up. The scars on her wrists were pale, silvery lines in the moonlight. "Untie me again," she said. Her voice was not the raw, desperate plea of the past. It was not a craving born of fear. It was a request. It was an invitation. It was the sound of a woman who was whole, asking her husband to come to her. Silas felt his throat tighten. He walked to her, his heart full. He did not see a victim. He saw his wife. He took her hands. He did not kiss the scars this time. The scars were history, not a wound. He kissed her palms. He kissed the ring on her finger. He raised her hands and kissed her lips, a long, slow kiss that held all the tenderness of the past year, all the quiet nights, and all the mornings they had watched the sun rise over the mountains. He lifted her into his arms, her white shift bright against the darkness, and carried her out of the cabin, onto the patch of earth that was theirs. They lay beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets, on the land they had chosen, their bodies entwined, their breathing slow. They were no longer haunted by the screams of the past, by the smell of smoke, or by the memory of ropes. They were just two people, under an endless sky, finally at rest. The next morning, Silas sat on the porch, the air sharp with the coming winter. He had a length of fine, cured pine across his lap, and his carving knife in his hand. He was slowly, carefully, working the wood. Clara came out, a cup of coffee in each hand. She sat on the step beside him, handing him a cup. She watched his strong, scarred hands move with a surprising delicacy. He was carving letters, H, R. "What is it?" she asked. "A name," he said. He kept carving. T, S. He was working on the last word. R, E, S. He was carving the final letter, a T. His knife bit deep into the wood. Clara put down her cup. She reached out and placed her hand over his, her smaller fingers guiding his, her strength joining his. Together, they finished the final stroke. The sign was done. He held it up. Heart's Rest. It was her name. It was their truth. Silas looked at the sign, then at her, her face bright in the morning sun. She smiled at him, a real, full smile that reached her eyes. They had both been lost, both broken by the brutal world. They had not found salvation in a church or in the law. They had not even truly been saved by each other. They had simply, stubbornly, saved themselves. But as he pulled her close, her head resting on his shoulder, they knew they had found the one thing they had both craved, even in their darkest, most silent moments. They had found someone to crave it with. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it brought the Wild West to life for you. Where are you listening from today? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more tales of survival, grit, and romance. We would love to hear your thoughts on Clara and Silas's journey. Please share them in English.